April, second weekend in April, second Friday in April, they decided to pour the bases for those two turbines. It's in 120 right west of me. There's 600 cubic yards of concrete in each of those, 500 in the base and 100 yards in the foot. There was over 100 cement trucks came down our road that day in the spring. There was 2 motor graders keeping the road up in the middle, so we couldn't, because once they start pouring, it's got to be continuous pour. So that was on a Friday. The following Saturday, Isabel County laid 4 inches of asphalt on top of Lincoln Road, and the following Tuesday, they put about 20 inches of crushed limestone on our road, and turned our road into, we had a beautiful road up until here about a month and a half ago. The county decided they wanted to put gravel on it because they couldn't grade that crushed limestone. So now we're back to potholes. At least we got a good pace on it there anyway. Okay, that's my philosophy. Like it or not, renewable energy is coming. And solar is going to be the only one answer. Well, fusion will be the only one answer if they ever get there. But that's where we stand anyway.
Yeah. Clyde said, I'd love to do a talk on solar panels. We'll do that someday, perhaps. Okay, we have a lot of questions, and I want to make sure to get to them. And so Ken, I'm not sure if he can hear. I hope he can. And we can bring him up as we need to. And we'll have to swap the mics. And JR, let me just make sure I point out which mic is his so we can bring him up. Alright, so lots of questions, and we'll get to them. Ken, I'll start with you, if you can hear me okay. It says if turbine sound is measured as an average, but what about when windmills are running at something like 90 decibels, and they're being averaged with lower sounds to get an average of 45 or 50? Does it seem fair that people should have to deal with 80 or 90 decibel range? And that was a question I had as well. Is there a max that a wind turbine creates, and is it in that range that is harmful? I say this, and I ask because, one, I have hearing loss genetically, so I've got hearing aids up here. and I used to be a wedding DJ, and so I had to play a lot of loud music, and so I'm pretty sensitive to how much sound is harmful to your ears, and at what distances. So when they ask the question, I do too, do turbines get to a level that is dangerous or harmful from the distance, the setback distance, or does it not get that distance because of setbacks or that volume? And then is averaging a factor?
That's a great question. Can you hear me okay?
Gotcha.
Okay. So let's say you set a 45 decibel standard. 99.9% of the time you're going to be operating within 3 decibels of that level. You would never get to 90 decibels. There's just no mechanism for that from a wind turbine, or even 80 or 70 decibels. So, and as I mentioned, the way that this LEQ works, or equivalent continuous average, is that it voids these higher sound levels. So even if you did have, say, in my example, was 12 sections of 70 decibels, you'd be over the standard, even if the wind turbines didn't operate for any of the 3,588 other seconds of that hour. So it's not an arithmetic average, it's a logarithmic average, and therefore it does take into account and weights those any higher sound levels that are over that standard. Now, the OSHA threshold limit value is 90 decibels over an 8-hour period. So, for protection of hearing, the continuous EPA guideline is 70 decibels over your lifetime. So, you're not going to be, with a 45 decibel standard, as an example, you're just not going to be at those hearing damage levels at all.
Okay, so because I'm standing behind the speakers, I'm having a hard time hearing you myself. So you're saying that they cannot create a decibel level of 80 or 90? They just, as the turbines are turning. I stood under one time, and I heard it go woof, woof, you know, while it was spinning, but I didn't know how many decibels that was as I was standing right under it. But you're saying that in terms of the question asking about it reaching 80 or 90 decibels, it just can't reach that level?
No, it can, and the studies we've done, you know, as a rule of thumb, the instantaneous maximum would never be more than 10 decibels above the maximum 1 hour average. So for 45 decibel standard, you're probably never going to get about 55 decibels for an instant of time.
Okay, all right, got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Back, I know it, 2018, on our project, they were gonna use Vestas turbines out of Denmark. And the neighborhood people was kind of hollering about the sound, so I went and did a little research. At the hub of the Vestas turbines, it said it was a maximum of 106 decibels. Our lease agreement was 55 decibels at 500 foot. And at the hearing, my wife and I went and testified. I mentioned that our flushing your toilet was 55 decibels. Today, I got a new phone. My flip phone I got a message here a few weeks ago said it was no longer compatible. I was going to start doing the service. So I got this new phone, and I discovered it's got an app that you can do sound measurements. So I went back to the turbines, right, about a quarter of a mile from the house today, and I stood at the base of that thing and turned on that, what's called, and recorded it. And there, with the wind blowing, I couldn't hear the turbine. The wind was making more noise than the turbine. You know, standing right next to it. I can't hear it. Well, once in a while, if it's dead, still wind at the ground level, those things are, the ones at our place, the nacelle is 400 foot in the air. We've got the tall ones. And if it's dead still and quiet, and that turbine is turning, if it tacks to pick up the wind, it's about like a dishwasher sound. It's actually less than the sound of the dishwasher in the house, but you can hear it's the mechanical gears, so you don't hear the generator working.
Okay, Ken, I have another question for you. One half of the question was similar to the one I just had, but this one is, are you saying that infrasound will not enter homes and resonate off materials inside of the homes? And I don't know anything about infrasound, so can it penetrate into a home?
Yes, infrasound goes through walls pretty easily, so it will do that. The resonant frequency, you usually don't get much of a resonance from infrasound because the wavelength of infrasound is so high. So you need a really big room to get a resonance. So low frequency sound is possible to get a resonance, but most homes just don't have the huge rooms that get the infrasound resonance from.
Okay, so you say you have to be in a big room before infrasound creates a resonance. It means it kind of bounces around the room. So we're in a room about 35 by 60 or something. I don't know how big this room, I'm guessing, but so if infrasound came through the walls of the building we're in right now, you're saying it could create a resonance, but a smaller room like a living room or a bedroom, it's not big enough for it to bounce around or whatever and create a resonance?
Right, so a resonance, like when you're in the shower and you sing in the shower, you know, and you hit a certain tone and it sort of accentuates that sound, that tone, that's a resonance. But the wavelengths have to be short enough so that the sound can essentially bounce around and constructively interfere with each other. But in a small room like the living room, for wavelengths on the order of tens or hundreds of meters, which are infrasound, there's just going to be a mechanism for it.
All right, next we'll go to questions for Dr. Ellen Bogan. I guess this is the order you guys spoke, so we'll throw them out here. But I'll ask any of you guys if you have, because both of you guys have experience in your communities as well. And you're not a veterinarian, you're a medical doctor. Does anybody on the panel have any awareness of if there are known health effects to animals, farm animals, pets, etc.? So I don't know if anybody can point to that. I mean, you have nearby, Chief, you've had them in your community, have you had farmers or anybody talking about problems with wind turbines and their animals?
There's always these talks about killing birds. One day last week, I went out and was sitting on a bench back by the back door. We have a mating flock of local geese. And across the road from me is a sand pit. They run a glide path, and hundreds of geese went through the blade pattern of that turbine on the fence back there. I didn't see any feathers anywhere. And it was turning at 10 RPMs at the time.
So you said that the geese flew toward it, but they didn't
They flew
around
on
it?
both sides of that turbine.
But they didn't go
Through
through
the blade pattern, as near as I can tell.
it? Right, okay.
Also, we've got a colony of bats in our house, and you always hear about wind turbines doing damage to bats. I haven't seen dead bats back there on that turbine. We still got a lot of them in our house.
Okay. All right, let's go more. Dr. Alan Bogan. How does one get vibroacoustic disease? And are you saying that this is a myth? I assume it's in association with turbines. Is there vibroacoustic disease? When people complain about vibration, pressure on their body, in their homes as a result of turbines, how can you explain this phenomenon?
There is a scientist, I think she's in Portugal, that invented the expression vibroacoustic disease, VAD. It literally is not a thing. I can't emphasize that enough. It's been examined. You couldn't find it in a medical textbook, in a lecture of any kind, and discussed in any setting like that. So let me first say that, and then come back to the concept of vibration. If I get close enough to a low frequency sound, I'll feel a vibration. I know as I was driving up here, I was side by side next to a tractor trailer, and I could feel the vibration of that engine. And if I walk right up to a turbine at full bore, I probably will feel it. The distance that you get as you get further and further from any sound source of any kind, and that includes vibration that you can feel but can't hear, because there are frequencies like that tractor trailer that are so low frequency but very high amplitude that I can actually feel boom, boom, boom in my chest. As you get further and further away from the source of that vibration, you're less and less apt to hear it. 2 lanes away, 4 lanes away, a couple blocks away, I'm not feeling any of that anymore. That vibration is still existing, but I've got enough distance between me and it that the amplitude has come down, and it's beneath the threshold of my human perception. Vibroacoustic disease was a made-up disorder by a single poor scientist. However, vibration is a real thing. And so what we know, and people have studied this for decades, and I wish I had a slide for it, and afterward I can send it to you Ed, so you can share with the group. There is a known threshold of human hearing, meaning I can turn the volume down and down and down and down, but not off, to where nobody in this room could hear it. And the same is true, there is a threshold for perception, the feeling of vibration, independent of hearing. I can put a tuning fork, boom, and place it on a bone on your skin, you'd feel it. And as that tuning fork, the amplitude winds down and down, the volume and effect of that, it will still be vibrating, but there'll be a point at which you can no longer feel it. And we know what those thresholds are, both for perception of hearing and perception of vibration. And we know that both of those thresholds are way higher than any sound produced by a turbine at the residence, meaning not standing right underneath it, but as you're in the realm of the regulations that you have in place thresholds that you have, by the time you're at your house, it's way below what you could possibly feel or hear. So that's why it's important to get some regulations on the books, so that you make sure that you're not of the sound that's right at the foot of the turbine itself. But what we're talking about today, and you know, we're not talking about making regulations, but I think we're applying that a reasonably sited modern turbine will be so far away from what human perception that it won't be an issue whatsoever.
Okay, because you talked about it, and I also asked, if flicker comes into your home and you find it distracting or even annoying, what remedy do people have? If annoyance creates stress, isn't stress a contributor to disease processes? Wouldn't a greater distance between the turbine and the home mitigate that annoyance?
If you have light that's flashing for, say, 60 seconds in one's living room, it has to be very early in the morning or very late at night, because the sun has to be at a low enough position that the blade is between one's vision and it. And that is a known thing. Before any turbine is anywhere near one's house, you should expect that the company can tell you exactly what day, how many minutes. There's a spreadsheet. It's going to say on March 2nd, you're going to have 15 seconds of shadow flicker hitting your living room. On March 3rd, it's going to be 14 seconds. And as the season moves on, that comes down to 0 and then comes back up again to 30 seconds in the summer and so forth. You'll know exactly what you're dealing with, which window and so forth. And at risk of being pragmatic, I think for those seconds at a time, one could close the blind. I mean, one could shut off the turbine. There are lots of remedies that one could do, but what it isn't is a disease-creating event. And I do hear from time to time the concept that annoyance leads to stress and stress leads to disease, and I would acknowledge that that is true. But if wind turbines, including their shadow flicker, were to cause enough annoyance that were true, it should have been picked up in the studies that were looking at those things. In other words, we don't have to say, well, if you're annoyed, you're going to have higher blood pressure and cardiovascular disease and headaches and those kind of things. Those are consequences. That's a reasonable hypothesis. But the study was looking at sleep disorders and stress and cardiovascular disease and cortisol levels, literally cutting pieces of hair looking for cortisol levels and asking questions about stress. So the annoyance level from that shadow flicker and from the turbines themselves are quite low, not enough to cause disease. And I'll add only one small modification, if I can indulge just a little bit more, is that I think the thing that will really get people wound up is you just pop on Google or you listen to someone who isn't really, is more into fear factor than fact, and that will really get your blood pressure going, because you'll see, you know, I remember the days when people would say, well, cell phone is going to cause brain tumors, and you know how many people put their phone down, and so that can really get just wound up if you read about you know, kind of misinformation that tells you that it's going to cause serious disease, which the wind turbines at these levels certainly will not. So I think the annoyance is a personal thing. I could easily imagine myself or someone else being annoyed. I think that's sort of a very personal thing that I'm not worried about health consequences from that. I am worried about your life experience, but that isn't my lane as a health provider. Some people love them, some people don't, and I think I'll step out of that element, but I'm just not worried about the health component of it.
Chief, did any of the turbine companies help pay for any training you needed, and if so, have they continued to fund training or equipment or whatever that was associated with your preparation or ability to handle a turbine event?
Well, they've sponsored some training that we've been to right at their sites, provided lunch, and we've had some actual tactical practices or training at those facilities. But in our particular case, no, but they have in some of the other fire departments in the county helped them purchase, you know, they've generated enough revenue on their own as a business, that now they're giving donations to help them purchase funds for fire prevention supplies for children and those types of things. So from a partnership in our area, they've been good partners in helping fund some of those additional projects that we either don't have the budget for or have not budgeted for. So.
Let me ask a related follow-up question then, and it's not a health question, but I'm gonna ask because you brought it up. Do the revenues that come in because of the taxes, is any of that attributed to like your 911 service or any aspect that adds to your ability to address a health issue? Or a safety issue, I should say.
Well, I'd say in our case, in Gratiot County, they're one of the earlier ones, and like farmers in our area, originally to sell this program, we looked at the farmer gets paid, and then the property next to him, they make a little less, and so forth. I don't know if that's still the process anymore. I never got into the land leasing or that portion of it, but from a countywide basis and from a township basis, and from the standpoint of revenues, they've created a tremendous amount of tax revenue in the county. The only thing that I was disappointed on, and I'm sure could probably speak to that better, and some of the people that understand tax increment financing and so all the things that go along with some of these niches that these agencies try to fit in to save tax, but they weren't opposed to paying taxes. But as the owners, the original builders of these things started to leave the area and started selling their wind turbines to Consumers Energy and DTE, then everything's off the table. They start working with the tax commission and looking at ways to, from a business model for them to reduce their tax burden. At the same time, it makes it really difficult for us when you look at fire villages and so forth to project, what your village rate's going to be, what your income off of that's going to be, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. I don't remember what the original depreciation rate was on those, was on the turbines in our area, and they all come on. In our fire district, it's really hard to manage that and put an actual number to it without working with each township's tax assessors, because I don't know if this wind turbine in your district came in and it was 80% rate, it worked down to 20, and did it come on January 1st of 2015, or did it come on January 1st of 2019, and how many years that depreciates out to the bottom and so forth. So that's been my only disappointment, was the promises that were made by the original owners of these have not been kept up by the bigger boys, the Consumers Energies and DTE. They're required by federal and state mandates to have a certain amount of green energy by a certain amount of time, and there's only so many dollars out there to do that without raising all of our individual costs on that. And so with what I explained earlier, where the city of Ithaca and the 6 townships we serve form a fire authority, part of my job this first year, as we look to rolling out a district-wide millage, as opposed to each township having, half a mil, or some having half a mil, or some having a mil and a half. Well, as we roll that out, I've got to predict what the first 5-year budget's going to be and the revenues that are going to come in from those. And right now, it's in legislation at the state level, but I'm going to give you my opinion. It's not the fire department's opinion, everybody else's, but tax commissions and drain commissioners have no oversight in the state of Michigan. So we're concerned right now where that's going to land as far as a revenue stream for the fire department. The county has gotten millions of dollars. We have, like I said, 5 of our 6 townships will, by the end of next year, have turbines. Some of them have more than others. But it created a little bit, when you're working on a fire formula with our townships, it created a little bit of haves and have-nots for quite some time, because we had 3 townships that had lots of money, and we're bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars in their fire funds, more than what their portion of the formula was. And then we had townships that didn't have any, that were struggling just to maintain basic services and roads. So from a standpoint of revenue, yes, brought in a lot of revenue to the county, and brought a lot of revenue into any of the townships that have those. But As far as the city of Ithaca goes, yeah, it helped with the fire budget, which they were part of, but from a standpoint of generating revenue for them, when they were being built, they generated a lot of revenue from motels and things like restaurants and so forth for the hundreds of workers that were in the area building them. Once they left, I think we've got a small maintenance facility in the South Industrial Park. I think there's about 8 or 10 people that are there, but the $150 million bean plant out here has provided a lot more tax base from an employment standpoint, and they also over the long haul will produce generate a lot more tax base for us. They're required to pay millages for special projects like school bonds and so forth, but we're in a position now in Gratiot County, if the legislation goes south on us, then there'll be some of our agencies, including our fire services, that may have to pay some of those revenues back. So it's a fight right now at the state level to maintain those revenue streams from those projects, because they're treated as personal property, so.
Okay, for an unelected guy, that was a long answer on tax. Just gonna say, a politician wouldn't give us as thorough an answer as that, Chief. For a guy who's never been running for office, I understand. Okay, Ken, back to you. How do you eliminate infrasound or low frequency noise from entering a home from a wind turbine? Is that possible? I don't know, if it can't create a resonance, infrasound, do you block it, or is there a reason to block it?
Right, most people don't try to block infrasound from homes. If it does become an issue, you probably have to deal with it by reducing the sound from the wind turbine by using these noise reduced operating modes, using space caps and so forth. But I've never seen anybody do a study of the effectiveness of things like space traps within homes. The weak point are the windows, so you wouldn't want to cover up the windows to reduce noise. The other thing that people do is use white noise to screen out the sound, so that it's not as noticeable.
Ken, you have to speak up a little bit.
Okay, what part did you hear?
I heard something about white noise, but that's when we started losing.
That's a white noise generator. They have them in offices, and they generate a broadband staticky sound that is in the background that you don't really notice, and it can mask other sounds in the environment. So you can tune them to lower frequencies so that the wind turbine sounds aren't as noticeable.
I was going to ask you about that because I have an autistic granddaughter, and she has sleep issues. And so they sometimes use white noise. But I was just curious about generally the other background noises. Like, I live in the country on 10 acres, and when I moved out of the city, I didn't realize how little noise I could leave my windows open, and other than the crickets and the peeper frogs, I didn't hear much, and I didn't realize how much background noise there was in my home in the city, per se, except for the boom cars and the fire engines or something like that. But generally, do the wind turbines exceed kind of the normal backdrop noise in the country, whether it's, I don't know what causes noise in the country, other than I know the wind blows across my neighbor's field, which is a soybean field at the moment next to my house. But, what is the ratio or the idea of the amount of additional noise or above the background noise that's just normally there? That's what my daughter uses, the white noise, because they live in the city of Grand Rapids. So they use that to kind of drown out the regular noise for the outside noise.
Right. So, and that depends, and I had that slide there that shows the range of sound in agricultural community and nighttime sound. There was quite a bit of a range, averaging about 41 decibels. There are lots of things in the community, and let's just take an agricultural community as an example. So, for good reason, the sound level that's emitted by a wind turbine is very much correlated to wind speed. So the higher winds you have, the more the turbines generate in terms of sound, up to a certain point, and above around 9 meters per second, it levels off. So the sound on the ground, the sound looking through the props, through the trees, around the house, is that wind-induced noise. It continues to increase when essentially the level from the turbine levels off. So at high wind speeds, the wind tends to mask the sound from the wind turbine. So actually, the turbine's most audible at sort of a moderate wind speed when the winds from the ground haven't increased too much. But there's also rain dryers, railroads, highway traffic, crickets, and other types of things. And, in addition to fans from the barn and other types of background sound. In fact, some of those LMAXs that we measure, most of those LMAXs that are high and measured when we're doing post-construction measurements are due to, a bird might land on the microphone and start tweeting away and generate high levels of sound, or I get a big truck passing by, or dogs barking, things like that. But the wind turbine sound is generally in a steadier, lower level.
Okay. So, just double back, what you're saying is that the wind turbines make a certain level of noise, and after a certain increase of wind speed, that kind of levels off, but as the winds get stronger, trees or other things will continue to make louder and louder noises. That's what I heard you say. Just want to make sure I understood what you said. And wind turbines kind of flatten, and they'll still, the faster they go, the more noise they make, they kind of level out.
They level out about, generally roughly about 98 meters per second, and they have an operating range from about 3 meters per second to 25 meters per second. So, the sound increases to about 9, and then it doesn't increase anymore generally.
Okay.
But of course, other wind-induced noise does increase continually.
All right, we have a lot more questions, so we're gonna try and let's move through this consistently as we can. Dr. Ellen Hogan, let's see, when we get these close to the right order that they can. You talked about seizures and epilepsy. What about other health issues and conditions that people may have? I guess they mean pre-existing conditions. Do people get sick from wind turbines with other conditions? I'm reading it that way, I'm not quite sure. Do people get sick from turbines with other conditions? I guess it maybe kind of like there's an underlying conditions, and then the wind turbines can complicate it?
Right. I think I'm tracking that. It's, if I have asthma, will my asthma be worse? Living in a wind turbine. I guess I don't know the answer to that. Maybe the simplest way to think about it is, I'll fall back to